The encounter, the night sky above the strange world shimmered with colors Daniel had never seen before, and the air felt heavier than the air of Earth, but not so heavy that he could not breathe. He stumbled through the tall, glowing grass that moved like ocean waves around him, and every step echoed in his ears, because silence pressed hard against him. The crash of his transport ship had left a scar on the land behind him, black smoke curling into the sky, but now that he had pulled himself free from the wreckage, he realized how far from home he truly was. Daniel was a soldier trained to survive in hostile places, but this was different. There were no familiar stars to guide him, and his radio crackled with nothing but static. He adjusted the straps of his torn uniform and kept walking, though his muscles ached and his head still rang from the impact. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he saw lights flickering, not the glow of fire, but something softer like lanterns. He forced himself toward them because instinct told him that where there was light, there might be life. As he approached, he saw structures rising from the ground, carved from the strange luminous stone that seemed to grow naturally here. They curved upward like towers and bridges woven together, and the lights flickered from inside windows carved into the stone. It looked like a village, alive and peaceful, but eerily quiet. The grass swayed, and a low hum filled the air, as if the planet itself was singing. Daniel stepped forward and froze because shadows were moving between the towers. He felt eyes watching him, and his hand went to the side of his belt, where his weapon had been, but the crash had taken it from him. He was unarmed, standing in a place that felt both beautiful and dangerous. His heart beat faster as the shadows began to take form. They were not men, and not like any women he had ever seen on Earth either. Figures emerged from the glowing towers, tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly in the colored light. Their hair flowed like threads of silver and gold, and their eyes shone as though holding fragments of stars. They were all female, and all staring at him with a mix of awe and something sharper. He realized with a cold shiver that they had never seen a human before, and perhaps never seen a male at all. The first of them stepped closer, tilting her head with curiosity. Her voice was soft, almost like music, but the words carried no meaning to Daniel. He tried to respond, raising his hands in peace and saying slowly, "I am not your enemy," but they only whispered among themselves. The whispers spread through the group like ripples in water, and more figures came forward surrounding him. Their expressions were strange, not hostile yet not gentle either. Daniel felt his pulse quicken as one of them reached out her hand and touched the fabric of his uniform. She pulled back quickly as though shocked by its roughness, then reached again with bolder curiosity. Soon, more of them joined in, brushing their hands against his sleeves, tugging lightly at the material, studying the seams as if they had never seen clothing before. The air grew tense as their fascination deepened, and Daniel realized he was completely at their mercy. He spoke again, slowly, carefully telling them his name, hoping they might repeat it and understand that he was a person, but their language remained a barrier. They laughed softly among themselves, their voices filled with wonder, and he saw some of them leaning closer, staring into his face as though memorizing every detail. Their curiosity was powerful, almost overwhelming, and Daniel felt exposed like prey in the middle of a circle of hunters, not sure if they would harm him or not. One of them suddenly pulled at his sleeve, and a tearing sound filled the air. The fabric split, and the group gasped in unison. Their eyes widened with shock and fascination, as though they had uncovered something secret. Daniel stepped back, raising his voice to protest, but they pressed closer, surrounding him more tightly. They pulled again at the cloth, tugging with childlike eagerness, but behind their bright eyes there was an edge of something darker. Something about their excitement made his skin crawl. The village lights flickered against their faces, making them look otherworldly, and for the first time, Daniel felt true fear. He was the only man here, the only human, and these beings who looked like women but moved with alien grace might not understand the danger of their own curiosity. He realized he could not fight them. He could only try to guide their attention to something else, or somehow show them that he was more than an object to pull apart. but his thoughts were drowned out by the press of bodies and the tug of hands pulling at his uniform until threads unraveled in their grip. He clenched his jaw and tried to stand tall, his voice steady, though his heart raced faster than ever. He had been trained to face combat, to endure hardship, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. For the first time he wondered not how he would survive a battle, but how he would survive being studied by a people who had no idea what a man even was. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting, and the eyes around him seemed to glow with questions he could not answer. His breath came quick and sharp as the realization struck him. This was not just an encounter. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because curiosity in the wrong hands can be as deadly as any weapon, and he was standing alone in the middle of it. Curiosity awakens. Daniel stood surrounded by the glowing figures, their whispers mixing like waves breaking against his ears. He could feel the cool night breeze brushing against his skin where the torn fabric of his uniform had given way, and it reminded him just how vulnerable he was here. These beings who looked like women yet carried the strange elegance of another world pressed closer, their luminous eyes locked on him, as if he was some discovery too important to ignore. The first moments of shock were fading, but in their place came a dangerous hunger for knowledge, and Daniel could sense that curiosity in numbers could turn into something far more threatening. The tallest of them leaned close, studying his face, and Daniel caught his own reflection shimmering faintly in her eyes. He wanted to believe there was no malice in them, only wonder, but the way her fingers trailed across his sleeve and down to the edge of his chest made him tense. Every instinct told him to step back, yet stepping back only pushed him into the reach of others who had circled behind him. Hands brushed against his boots, against the belts at his waist, tugging lightly, testing every detail of the strange creature who had fallen from the sky. He tried speaking again, his voice firm, though calm, telling them slowly that his name was Daniel, and repeating it twice as if repetition might plant it into their minds. He tapped his chest, saying Daniel over and over. One of the alien girls tilted her head, repeating something back to him, though the word came out warped and fragile on her tongue, like the sound of glass cracking. But it was a start, and his heart lifted for a moment, because if they could mimic sound, maybe they could understand meaning too. Their laughter rang out sharp and strange when another one tugged at his glove, pulling it free and staring wide-eyed at the hand beneath. She touched his fingers with fascination, tracing the lines of his skin as though each crease told a story. When Daniel flexed his hand, she gasped and pulled back, then leaned in again as if she could not resist. Some of the others now pressed forward, pulling at the other glove, then his boots, then the straps of his jacket, and the more they pulled, the less Daniel could stop them. He was outnumbered, his strength useless against so many eager hands. The tearing of cloth came again, this time louder, and Daniel felt his stomach sink as part of his jacket gave way, exposing more of him to their alien gaze. They murmured among themselves, voices rising with energy, their excitement contagious within their group. He could feel the heat of their bodies, the strange faint glow of their skin brushing against his arms, and it set his nerves on edge. He knew that if their fascination grew unchecked, it would turn into something beyond his control, and then survival would slip from his hands. Daniel remembered his training moments in which survival meant keeping calm when surrounded by uncertainty. He forced his breathing steady, and instead of pulling away, he raised his hand open and slow, pointing to the sky, then to himself, then to the ground. He wanted them to see that he was not just flesh or clothing, but a person from somewhere beyond. He tapped his chest again, saying Daniel, then pointed to one of them waiting. She blinked, then spoke a sound he could not understand. But she touched her own chest as if answering. His heart raced with cautious hope, because now there was a thread of communication forming between them. For a short moment, the alien girls quieted, watching this exchange. The circle loosened just slightly, as if curiosity had turned into listening. Daniel seized the chance and repeated the action again, pointing to another one. She hesitated, then said something sharp and musical, and touched her chest. The pattern spread through the group, each of them Giving a Namathau, Daniel could not capture the sounds clearly. They were like notes of a song, high and trembling, but they carried identity. He repeated each one awkwardly, his tongue stumbling, but the effort made their glowing eyes soften. Yet peace lasted only as long as their restraint could hold, for when one of them touched his arm again, her hand lingered too long, sliding down to the torn fabric and peeling it wider. Her sisters gasped, whispering quick words, and soon they were all touching again, curiosity stronger than before. The fragile line of communication cracked under the weight of their eagerness. Daniel tried to step back, but hands pulled him forward again, and laughter mixed with the hum of the village towers. The language barrier returned like a wall, and now he was less a person in their eyes, and more an object of fascination. Fear prickled the back of his neck. He could handle being studied, but when they began to tug at his belts and straps, he knew they were crossing into dangerous ground. His survival kit was still attached to his side, the only thing he had left of the ship. If they pulled it apart, he would lose his last chance of rescue. He pushed one hand down, firmly gripping the pack against him, shaking his head and saying, "No," in a voice as hard as stone. The word meant nothing to them, but the tone made them pause. The pause did not last long. Their whispers turned sharper, a debate sparking among them. Some gestured toward Daniel, with wide motions as if insisting he must be kept here. Others looked uneasy, their gazes darting between him and their sisters, as though unsure whether this curiosity was right or wrong. The circle broke into smaller groups, talking heatedly, and Daniel stood tense in the middle like prey that had been forgotten only for a moment. His chest rose and fell fast, but his eyes scanned for a path out of their grip. The village around them glowed brighter, as if the towers themselves responded to the energy of the crowd. Shadows flickered across the stone walls, and Daniel realized this was no small group anymore. More of them were coming, drawn by the noise, tall figures with glowing eyes, spilling out of the towers into the open square. They surrounded him now, not in tens but in dozens, and the weight of their attention pressed down like a tide crashing against him. He swallowed hard because escape was slipping further away with each heartbeat. Then the tallest one raised her hand and the crowd quieted. The air thickened as her voice rose, carrying authority, though Daniel could not understand her words. He could feel from her tone that she was making a decision, something final. The others listened with wide eyes, and some nodded eagerly. While others hesitated, Daniel clenched his fists because he knew what it meant. He was not free to leave, not yet. They had found the first human male they had ever seen, and their curiosity would not let him go. Curiosity turns dangerous. Daniel stood in the middle of the glowing square as the tall leader lowered her hand, and silence settled around the crowd of alien girls. He could hear only the sound of his own breathing and the faint hum that seemed to rise from the strange towers around them. The circle had grown thick, with faces shining in the dim light, and all those eyes focused on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He had survived battles before, he had faced enemy fire and the chaos of war, but never had he felt such a heavy weight of being so completely alone, surrounded by beings who did not understand what he was, yet could decide in an instant that he was not allowed to be free. The leader moved closer, her steps slow and graceful like the steps of someone who had never needed to rush. She stopped just in front of Daniel and studied him, her gaze traveling over his torn uniform, the cuts on his skin, the pack still strapped to his side. She spoke again, her voice calm yet commanding, and at her words, the others moved forward, hands reaching once more toward him. Daniel clenched his fists and shook his head, stepping back sharply, but the circle tightened and hands pressed against his arms and shoulders, their strength greater than their delicate forms suggested. He felt them pushing, guiding him toward the base of one of the stone towers. He tried to resist, his voice rising as he shouted his name again, louder than before, repeating it like a shield. But his words carried no power here. They answered with their own voices, a chorus of sounds sharp and musical, yet edged with urgency, and Daniel could feel the shift in the air. Their curiosity had grown restless. They no longer wanted to only look and touch, they wanted to keep him, to study. him to claim him as something belonging to them. His heart pounded faster because now he understood they did not see a soldier. They did not see a man with a life of his own. They saw a rare discovery that must not be allowed to escape inside the tower. The air was cooler, and the stone glowed faintly as though lit from within. The walls curved upward into shadows, and Daniel was pushed into the center of a wide chamber. He stumbled but caught himself quickly, his eyes scanning the space. There were no weapons, no tools, no clear path out, only more of them gathering at the entrance, blocking any chance of retreat. They spoke among themselves, their words tumbling over each other, and though he could not understand the meaning, the way they looked at him while speaking made his stomach tighten. They argued with passion, some voices rising higher than others, some filled with eagerness, others with doubt. One of the younger ones stepped forward, boldness in her glowing eyes. She reached to his chest where the fabric had been torn, and pressed her hand flat against his skin. Her touch was cold, yet it carried a strange softness. She tilted her head, listening, perhaps to the beat of his heart. Her sisters gasped at the sound, then pressed closer, wanting to hear for themselves. Daniel pulled back, but hands grabbed his arms, holding him steady while others leaned in, ears close against his chest, their faces shining with amazement. The sound of his heart seemed to thrill them, their whispers, fast and sharp as if they had uncovered a hidden treasure. Panic shot through him, because they were not treating him as equal. They were treating him as something between a mystery and a possession. He tried to shake free, but their grip was strong. Too many hands against his body, and he knew struggling harder might make them forceful in return. His mind raced, searching for a way to turn their attention, a way to remind them he was not just flesh and sound. He remembered the small communicator, still tucked in his pack, the device cracked from the crash, but with a faint light still glowing. If he could reach it and activate the signal, perhaps even its noise would show them something beyond their own world. He motioned toward the pack, tapping it and saying again, Daniel pointing from his chest to the bag, then to the sky. They hesitated, eyes narrowing, as if they understood a part of his meaning. He pulled the bag forward, slowly opening it, just enough to reveal the blinking light of the communicator. The chamber filled with gasps and whispers as they leaned closer, the glow reflecting in their wide eyes. The leader stepped nearer, her hand hovering just above the device, not touching it, but staring at it with fascination. They spoke again, words sharp and quick, and Daniel realized they now believed this object was part of him, maybe even the source of his power. The danger deepened when one of them tried to snatch the device from his hands. Daniel pulled back, sharply shaking his head and holding it close. His voice rose firm and commanding, saying, "No," with all the force of a soldier protecting the only thing that could save him. The sudden harsh tone made them pause. But the pause was short. Some began to argue louder, gesturing toward him and the device while others tried to hold them back. The chamber filled with tension, like a storm waiting to break, and Daniel stood trapped in the center, feeling the air press tighter with every heartbeat. The leader finally spoke again, her voice carrying calm but final weight. The crowd quieted, listening, and then, as if obeying a silent command, they surged forward, not with violence, but with firm, unstoppable strength. Daniel was forced down to his knees, hands gripping his shoulders, his arms pinned. He struggled, his chest heaving, his mind screaming at the loss of freedom. They wanted to restrain him, to hold him, until they had learned all they wished. His communicator nearly slipped from his grasp, and he clutched it tight, desperate not to lose the last tie to hope. In that moment, fear sharpened into steel within him. He could not fight them all, but he could show them he was not weak, not a passive creature to be pulled apart. He lifted his head, meeting the gaze of the leader with eyes burning with defiance. His voice cracked with strain, but he spoke anyway, repeating his name again and again, pointing to himself, then lifting the communicator high toward the sky. The sound of his heartbeat pounded in the chamber, louder in his own ears than the whispers around him. He wanted them to see not just a specimen, but a man reaching for survival. The leader held his gaze for a long moment, silence stretching between them. Then she spoke softly, and the Grip on his arms loosened only slightly, just enough for him to breathe, but not enough to escape. Daniel stayed still, chest rising, and falling eyes locked on hers, because now he understood her curiosity had shifted from playful to dangerous. Now on every move he made would decide whether they saw him as a person to respect or a thing to control, and that thin line would determine whether he lived or died in this alien place. The struggle, the chamber of the glowing tower seemed to close in on Daniel as the crowd of alien girls surrounded him with their luminous eyes filled with desire to know more and to hold him in place. Their voices rose and fell in sharp tones, like waves colliding on a stormy shore. The leader stood at the front, her gaze calm yet unyielding, while her followers pulled at Daniel's arms and shoulders, keeping him low on his knees. He had the communicator clutched tightly against his chest, its faint blinking light casting a soft glow across his bruised fingers, and he knew if they took it from him, his last connection to survival would vanish forever. His mind raced through fragments of his training. Survival meant more than fighting. It meant thinking faster than those around him and finding strength in moments where fear threatened to crush the will to act. He closed his eyes for a moment and steadied his breathing, then opened them again with a calmness that hid the storm. Inside, he studied their faces, noticing small cracks in their unity. Some of the girls looked away, their eyes uneasy, as if uncertain about what they were doing. Their curiosity was strong, but it was beginning to collide with doubt, and that doubt was something Daniel could use. He moved his free hand slowly, pointing first to himself, then to the communicator, then to the sky, repeating the motion again and again. His voice carried firm and steady as he said Daniel, each time tapping his chest to anchor the meaning. His words echoed through the chamber, and though the language barrier still stood tall, some of them began to murmur softer, more thoughtful whispers. Their eyes flickered between him and the leader, and Daniel felt the pressure on his arms loosen just slightly as hesitation spread through the group. But hesitation was fragile, like glass that could shatter at the slightest push. The boldest of them stepped forward again, her eyes burning with determination. She reached for the communicator, her fingers brushing against Daniel's hand, and in that instant, the struggle burst into life. He pulled back sharply, twisting his body with the force of a soldier trained to survive. The sudden movement caught them off guard, and their grip weakened. He surged to his feet, breaking free from some hands, though others clawed at his arms, trying to drag him back. The chamber erupted in noise as voices clashed in anger and alarm. Daniel darted toward the wall, searching for an exit, his boots pounding against the stone floor. The glowing towers seemed to hum louder, as if reacting to the chaos around them. Hands reached for him, pulling at his uniform, and he shoved them aside, using his weight and momentum rather than violence. He could not hurt them, because hurting one might turn them all against him completely. But he could not allow himself to be pinned. Again, a narrow passage opened between two figures who hesitated in confusion, and he pushed through it, bursting into the open square outside. The night air hit him cool and sharp, and he drew a deep breath as he sprinted across the glowing grass. The village spread around him, with towers rising like pale giants, their windows glowing with light. More of the alien girls appeared, drawn by the noise, their faces filled with shock as they saw the human running among them. The whispers grew into shouts, and the sound followed him through the streets as footsteps gathered behind. He clutched the communicator close to his chest, praying that it would hold together long enough for him to find high ground and send a signal strong enough to break through the alien sky. But the pursuit was swift. Their bodies moved with grace and speed, their steps silent on the grass and stone. Daniel could feel them closing in, and his lungs burned with the effort of each stride. He darted into a narrow path between towers, his eyes searching for any place to hide, or any path that led upward. He found a spiral of stone stairs carved into the side of one tall tower, and he leapt onto them, taking the steps two at a time. His breath came ragged, but determination pushed him higher until he reached a wide platform near the top, overlooking the strange glowing land. View stretched endlessly, with fields of shimmering grass, and the crash site faint in the distance, black smoke still rising into the colored night sky. He held the communicator high, pressing the cracked switch until it hummed faintly. The blinking light flared brighter for a moment, sending out a weak pulse. He prayed that somewhere far above a satellite or a ship might still catch the signal. His hope flickered with that light, but it was fragile and uncertain. Below him the sound of pursuit grew louder as figures began to climb the steps, their glowing forms winding upward through the spiral. Daniel turned back to the platform, scanning for anything he could use to hold them off. The stone was smooth and empty, only the faint hum of the tower vibrating beneath his boots. He clenched his fists, ready to fight with nothing but his own strength and will if they reached him. But then something unexpected happened. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs before the others, one of the girls who had looked uneasy in the chamber. Her eyes shone not with hunger, but with something softer, curiosity mixed with caution. She raised her hand not in threat, but in peace, speaking words that Daniel could not understand, yet her tone carried plea rather than command. He stood frozen, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling as the others climbed closer. She gestured toward the communicator, then to the sky, then back to him. Her motions echoed his own from before, and in that moment Daniel realized she understood a piece of what he had been trying to say. She stepped closer, slowly ignoring the shouts from below, and pressed her hand against her chest, speaking her name again with clarity. Daniel repeated it, though clumsily, and she nodded, her glow brightening as though in approval. She then pointed down at the crowd and shook her head sharply, her tone firm as she shouted at them. Pursuing voices slowed, confusion breaking their rhythm. Daniel watched as the girl turned back to him, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time he felt the faintest thread of connection, one that stretched beyond fear or curiosity. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. He lowered the communicator slightly, though he kept it close, and nodded once to show that he understood. She stepped beside him, facing her sisters, as they reached the top of the stairs, and her voice rose again, filled with strength. She was not just speaking for herself, she was speaking for him. The crowd hesitated, some glaring with frustration, others whispering among themselves. The leader finally emerged, her gaze sharp as steel. She studied Daniel and the girl who now stood at his side, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched heavy across the platform, the air filled with the hum of the tower and the soft blinking of the communicator. Daniel stood tall, shoulders squared, his eyes meeting the leader's without flinching, because he knew this moment would decide his fate. Either they would see him as something more than a specimen, or they would take him as their possession, and he would be lost. Resolution. Platform trembled with the weight of silence as Daniel stood with the strange glowing girl beside him, while the others crowded at the top of the stairs, their voices rising in fragments of doubt and frustration. The leader remained at the front, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp with the weight of command. The communicator in Daniel's hand blinked faintly, its light weak yet steady, and he knew it was the only thread still tying him to hope. He held it close, but not in defiance now, instead, as a sign that he was not simply a thing to be pulled apart. He stood with his shoulders squared, meeting the leader's gaze as the girl beside him spoke in tones that carried courage. Her words flowed in a rush, sharp and musical, and though Daniel could not understand the meaning, he could feel the strength in them. She pointed at him, then at the communicator, then to the sky, repeating the motion just as he had done before. Her glow brightened with each word, and she stood tall between him and her sisters. Her defiance sparked murmurs through the crowd, some shaking their heads, others lowering their eyes, as though considering her courage seemed to pull at the threads of their curiosity, turning it into something heavier, something like thought. The leader stepped forward, her hands clasped at her sides. She spoke slowly, her tone calm and controlled, and the sound of her voice silenced the crowd. She looked at Daniel, then at the girl, then at the communicator. Her gaze lingered on the faint blinking light, and for a moment, Daniel feared she would order them all to seize him, but she did not move. Instead, she asked something, her tone curious, yet edged with warning. Daniel could not answer with words, so he answered with action. He raised the communicator high, pressing the cracked switch so the light flared brighter, sending out its fragile signal. He tapped his chest, saying Daniel, then pointed again to the sky. The leader's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing together. She seemed to weigh the meaning of his actions, and the silence stretched until Daniel's chest tightened with fear. But then she turned her gaze to the girl who stood at his side. Their eyes locked in a silent battle, and finally the leader exhaled slowly. She raised her hand, and the crowd behind her stood waiting for her command. The leader spoke once more. Her voice firm and final, and the weight of it pressed across the platform. Daniel did not understand the words, but he could feel the decision in the air. Something had shifted, hands no longer reached for him. The crowd parted slightly, giving him space, though their eyes still burned with curiosity. Some looked angry, some disappointed, some simply uncertain. But the frenzy that had gripped them before had loosened. The girl at his side turned to him, her eyes shining softer than before, and she gestured toward the horizon where the black smoke of his crash still drifted into the night. She spoke gently, and though he could not understand the words, her tone carried meaning. She was telling him to return to the place he had come from. Daniel felt a wave of relief so strong it almost weakened his knees. He had stood on the edge of being lost forever, and now he was being given a chance at survival. He bowed his head slightly, placing his hand over his chest in thanks, then lifted the communicator again and pointed to the sky one last time. The girl nodded, her glow brightening, as if she understood. He turned toward the stairs, moving slowly, his body aching, but his spirit steady. The crowd parted as he descended, their whispers following him, but no hands reached out to hold him. Any more than night air greeted him again, cool and sharp, carrying the hum of the strange towers. He walked back through the village, the glowing figures watching him from doorways and shadows. Their eyes still filled with wonder, yet now touched with something else, respect. He kept his pace steady, his eyes fixed on the smoke in the distance. Every step away from the village felt like a step back toward freedom. And though fear still coiled in his chest, hope had begun to push against it stronger than before. At the crash site, the wreckage still burned faintly, twisted metal glowing under the strange colored sky. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the shattered hull, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He placed the communicator on a flat piece of debris and adjusted it as best as he could, the blinking light flickering brighter as he angled it toward the sky. He pressed the switch again, sending out another signal weaker than he wished. But steady, he whispered his name into the static, Daniel, over and over, hoping that somewhere far beyond this alien sky someone might hear. The night stretched long and heavy around him, and he felt the weight of loneliness pressing hard. Yet in the silence he also remembered the girl who had stood beside him, her glow soft with courage and her voice strong. Against the will of her sisters, she had seen him not as a specimen, but as a living being. He held on to that memory, because it meant that even on a world where he was the first human male to ever be seen, there was still a chance for understanding. For connection, however fragile it might be. Hours passed until the communicator flickered once more, a faint sound breaking through the static. Daniel froze, his heart pounding, as a distorted voice crackled through, barely audible but real. A signal had reached someone. He shouted his name again, louder this time, and the device responded with a sharper pulse. The hope that filled him was stronger than any fear he had felt, and though rescue was still uncertain, he knew he was no longer alone. His message had broken through the silence of this world. He sank back against the wreckage, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind alive with determination. The alien girls had tried to claim him, their curiosity had nearly destroyed him. Yet he had endured, not by fighting with violence, but by standing with strength, and showing that he was more than they believed. His survival was not only in his own hands, but in the meaning of what he had shown them, that humanity was not weak, not simple, not something to be owned. Humanity was will and dignity and resilience. As the sky shifted with strange colors and the hum of the planet carried through the air, Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deep. He had faced fear, and curiosity that turned dangerous, and he had walked away still standing. The girl's face came to his mind, her eyes glowing with defiance and compassion. And he knew their paths might cross again, if fate allowed. For now he would wait for rescue. His body battered but his spirit unbroken. The first human male these alien girls had ever seen had not become their possession. He had become their lesson and their memory, and as the faint signal of the communicator reached out into the endless stars, Daniel held on to the unshakable truth that humanity survives not only with strength of body, but with the courage to stand even when alone they end.